Chain stretch actually exists and it costs you money. Well, sort of. I mean, your chain will grow in length as it wears out over time, and that will in turn wear out more expensive parts on your bike. So stick with me as I'm going to explain exactly what it is and how you can avoid it. Let's be clear, chains don't actually stretch. I mean, metal doesn't stretch, but it does wear out, and that will make the chain grow in length over time, and that will give it the illusion of stretching, which gives it the affectionate name of chain stretch. So how does chain stretch actually occur? A chain is made up of inner plates and outer plates, rollers to separate those plates, and pins to fix them together. As the chain moves, it causes friction between the pins and the inner plates, which will eventually cause the pins to wear grooves in those plates, making the holes fractionally bigger. And as pins settle into those bigger holes, tiny fractions of movements multiplied over every link in the chain eventually adds up to millimeters of growth in length. So here I have a brand new 12-speed Shimano chain, and I have the exact same chain that is very worn here. So the plates and the pins should be the exact same distance apart, but as you can see, they're eventually getting out of whack as those pins settle into the bigger holes on the worn chain, so it gives the illusion of growing in length. So that's what a chain checker is for, because what it's doing is checking the amount of growth in your chain. So if it reads something like 0.25, then it's telling you it's increased by 0.25%. So your inner plate and your outer plate are spaced exactly an inch apart. So your components, like your chainring, your cassette and your jockey wheels, will all be designed to perfectly mesh with that chain. So if your chain grows in length, it will no longer mesh with those components. And that means it'll lead to poor shifting, perhaps skipping on the cassette. It might even lead to breakage, which I've done here. So at worst, this will start to wear out far more expensive parts on your bike, like your cassette. You might see some overlised grooves or some overly pointy and sharky teeth, which means this will definitely need replacing, and that's far more expensive than a chain, which is why you need to keep on top of the length of it. So this is why a chain checker can actually save you a lot of money, because if we can keep on top of the stretch and replace that chain before it's excessively worn, then it will save the rest of our drivetrain. So for example, this Shimano XT chain will cost you about 25, maybe 45 pounds, depending on where you buy it. But this cassette alone, Shimano XT, will cost you about 120 pounds. And if that's worn, you'll almost certainly need to replace your jockey wheels and your front chainring. But if we were to replace the chain, even if you were to replace it 2 or 3 times in a year, that's still a lot cheaper than replacing your entire drivetrain. So there's a few methods to check whether your chain is worn or not. The first one is the simplest, and it doesn't require a tool. All you need to do is pull on your chain at the front chainring, and if there is any daylight between the two, then that means your chain is worn. Now the problem with this method is it isn't super accurate, because it might just be indicating that your front chainring is worn, and also it won't be giving you a percentage reading, so it might just be telling you that your entire drivetrain is worn at this stage, and it won't be giving you an indicator that you can replace it in order to save your drivetrain. So obviously a chain checker is going to show you how long the chain has grown by, and the most common one is something like a metal plate like this. And what you'll do is you'll pop this into the back of one of the rollers, and you'll drop this arm into the hole. Now this one reads 0.5 and 0.75. So if it's anywhere before 0.5, then it won't actually make a reading. So you won't know whether it's coming close to it. Now we use a CC2 like this from Park Tools, which means you can drop it into the gaps between the pins and move the dial to read the percentage growth. And the good thing about this one is that it reads from 0.25, which is about the sort of time that you want to start thinking about replacing your chain, or at least getting a backup ready for when it reads 0.5. Park Tools also offer a CC4, which is very similar to this, but it has an extra arm here, so you can squeeze the chain up into that groove, and it makes sure that the back of the plate rests firmly into the roller, giving you a more accurate reading. And the fact that it's longer also gives you a more accurate average reading over a longer space as well. So that sort of style is really good for 12 speed and above, and also the SRAM Eagle transmission as well. Just to clarify, if you have a drivetrain that is 11 speed or 12 speed, then you want to be replacing it at 0.5% at most. So this is why I like chain checkers with a 0.25% reading, because that means I know that I need to start ordering a chain and keeping an eye on it and replacing it before it gets to that 0.5%. If it gets to a 0.75%, then it means it's probably time to replace your entire drivetrain, and a new chain might not quite mesh with the old components that you have on there. If you have less than 11 speed, say for example a 10 speed, you might be able to get away with a 0.75% stretch, but you'll find out as soon as you put your new chain on. And the final method is to use a metal ruler if you don't have a tool, because chains are measured in inches. So as I said earlier, an inner and an outer link are exactly an inch apart on the pins. So if you were to line your chain up with that ruler on the inch measurements, then you'll see that those pins slot exactly into those inch measurements. So if you see that the final pin at the end of your ruler is, say, a 1/16 of an inch or just one notch over from the inch measurement, then that is enough to indicate that the chain is worn and it's now elongated and needs replacing. So now we know that keeping an eye on chain stretch and replacing that chain regularly will prolong the life of the rest of the components in our drivetrain. But there are a few ways of increasing the life of our chain as well. So as we know, the chain is made up of metal parts, and as it moves, that causes friction, and that friction is what's causing the wear in our chain. If we keep on top of lubricating our chain, that will act as a buffer between those metal parts, and that should extend the life of the chain. Also, your chain will pick up mud and dirt and even dust, and that can cause a bit of a paste, and it will certainly increase the friction in your chain. So keeping on top of cleaning that chain will also prolong its life. And finally, let's just mention chain slop, which isn't the same as chain stretch, because sometimes your chain can wear out at the rollers or on the inner sides of the plates, and that will cause poor shifting, but it won't actually stretch the chain as such, and your chain checker won't be able to measure for that. So if you have poor shifting and you can't find any other problems with your indexing or your inner cables or the rest of your drivetrain, for example, it might be that the chain is worn, but your chain checker isn't reading it. The only way you'll know for sure is changing that chain to a new chain and seeing if the problem is fixed. Anyway, that's all we got time for today, but hopefully that's gone a long way to explaining what happens with chain stretch and why you want to avoid it. But if you have any other tips that I haven't mentioned today, then do let us know down in the comments below and help out that future GMBN Tech community.